Hi, I'm Kirk Degiorgio, DJ and producer, and I'm here for Sonic Academy to present to you a series of tutorial videos on Arturia's effects range. We're going to be looking at some modulation effects, delays, and some reverbs. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Chorus Dimension D. Okay, so let's have a look at Arturia's Chorus Dimension D, modelled after the famous Roland Dimension D, which was released in the very late 70s, 1979 I believe, and used extensively by various artists in the early 80s. And it's such a classic rack mount unit that it's still seen in most top studios today. Now, Arturia have really been faithful to the original 2U rack unit. As you can see, very minimal controls. There's no knobs at all. There's not even any input gain or trim levels, so you'll have to manage your gain staging before you go into the plugin. What it does have is a mode switch here, and it is a true stereo unit, so if you put in a stereo audio signal, it processes each left and right side separately and you will get stereo in, stereo out. But what this Dimension D really excels in is turning mono signals into pseudo stereo. And it does that by applying some psychoacoustic tricks, which I will try and explain very briefly. It uses a system called Bucket Brigade delays, and what was great about the Roland when it first came out was it doubled the amount of delay stages within its design, so it has 1024 delay stages, and this gave it a really lush kind of intricate detailed sound, and it really surpassed most other chorus effects that were around at the time, which used half of those delay stages and sounded rather artificial. It is of course a digital design, and I think some of the magic is in feeding back the signal to introduce some interesting phase delay so that you get a really 3D perspective, hence its name Dimension D. You'll see here you just have another 4 knobs. 0, obviously the effect is off, and then you have 3 different modes which I will just cycle through with our audio example, and then you have a 4th knob here, and if you engage that, it kind of increases the intensity of the effect depending on each button. And then you have your output level. So although Arturia give you a handy output gain here, the original was quite difficult, you can of course really fine tune that so that you're not clipping the output, getting some harsh distortion, or you may want to push the unit slightly. And then you have your bypass power switch here. Okay, so as I said, one of its real fortes was giving a real magical width and movement to mono signals. And if I play you this track I've quickly knocked up, I've got some very rough drums. Now what I've done, I've taken, I've got a lovely new Moog grandmother here, and it's got a great spring reverb. Of course it's all mono, so I've separated, luckily the Moog gives you separate outputs for the spring reverb and for the regular line output. So I've taken the dry signal and I've taken the fully wet spring signal and I've separated them here. And what I'm going to do is use the Dimension D just on the spring reverb to give it a really pseudo stereo effect and add some movement. Now if I just play it without the effect here, if I turn everything off and I just play you the track very quickly. If I just lose the drums there, that's the sound with the dry and wet merged. It's the signal on its own, just the dry signal there, and then we have the sound of the spring reverb. And I'm going to sit that spring reverb just behind the dry signal, and I've put the Dimension D plugin on that channel, the spring reverb channel. Now check this out. Instantly the stereo stage opens up. It gives it that 3D-like effect. And you've converted a mono spring reverb, which sounded great, It's given it a really lush, wide stereo sound. Chorus effects traditionally rely on subtle pitch shifts up and down, and the more sophisticated they are, the more subtle that effect is, and you can really hear that. Those 1024 delay stages really go towards making this a very detailed, lush sound. Then we increase the intensity of the effect by pushing in button number 4. Now check this out, we're going to go back to no effect, and you'll really hear it's difficult to go back. Goes all small and narrow, obviously it's in mono. Really lovely sound, it really lives up to its name of the Dimension D. Let's cycle through. Here's the second dimension. You can really hear it's got some auto panning style effect going on, but everything's really subtle. It's like a chorus meets subtle pitch shifter meets auto panner meets diffusion. It's a really, really magical unit, and nothing else quite does what the Dimension D does. Go on to our third dimension here. Increase the effect. Just the dry signal. Let's just sit this sound in the background. There we go. Okay, Arturia have really been faithful to the original unit, but as with most of their plugins, they have added some neat hidden features that brings it more up to date, and that's the same with the Dimension D, although there's really only so much you can do to such a fixed design. So they've given you access to the internal oscillator shape, which is really neat. So we have our spring sound soloed here. Let's have a listen to these different oscillator shapes, which you wouldn't normally have access to. I like that kind of random stair-stepped effect. Rather random gurgly sound. Couple of glitches in there, obviously because it's not smooth as using a sine wave. That's a smoother version of that random sound. That's really nice. Let's leave it on that. Excellent stuff. Here we have a dynamic color feature. Now internally there is some compression and some expansion going on, and that kind of gives it its sonic color, and you can also have access to that. So the default setting, we can have smooth, the low frequency saturation. They're very slight, subtle differences, I would say. You might find maybe the low frequency saturation settings, add some bottom end. Here we have the stereo width control. You can boost the sides there to get massive width on that sound. Dry and wet, with mix right in the middle. That's the magic of the Dimension D, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. Well done, Arturia. What I thought it would be interesting to do is to have a little battle between the Arturia version and the other Dimension D plugin emulation that's around by Universal Audio. So I'm just going to record some of this audio into the arrangement view, and then we're going to switch in and switch out the two different plugins just to compare. Okay, so I've recorded some of that audio in, and we now have the Arturia Dimension D and we have the UAD Dimension D, and there is a slight difference between the two. Here, button 4 increases the intensity of the effect of dimensions 1, 2 and 3. On the UAD, button 4 gives us an all button mode, which replicates all 3 buttons being pushed in at once, and you have quite a dramatic effect. That's the only thing that button 4 does. It doesn't give you the added intensity of 1, 2 and 3 that the Arturia version does. Now, I've just been listening to this, and the first thing I've noticed is the kind of gain structuring is slightly different. We've got exactly the same level going into both units here, but when we just listen to the UAD, you'll see the output is slightly less. If I play this along, if you see here, you can tell which one is active by these yellow dots here. The chorus D of the Arturia is the first one to be active, and then the UAD will kick in, and you can tell by these yellow dots here which is active and which isn't. See the output there goes up to -10, and on here we're well below that. So what we're going to do is lower the gain to try and match them up to begin with. That should be slightly more even. Okay, so what we have now, we have Dimension 1 engaged for both. Just adjust the gain a little bit better, just to match them up. And I think you can hear just how similar they are. I mean, I can hardly notice any difference at all there. Let's try dimension number 2. UAD. So apart from the output gain, it's really hard for me to tell any difference between the two. Maybe the UAD is a slightly darker sound, but to do the tutorial I have to listen. I've got pretty good headphones here, but if I had some really good monitors, I might be able to hear some difference in the bottom end maybe, but really those two are so close. So if you haven't invested in the Universal Audio environment, you can now get your Dimension D emulation from Arturia as a native plugin, and as you can hear there, it really is a hair's breadth between the two sonically. Okay, so that's your look at Arturia's Dimension D.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content, and if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.